this paper, second paper, because the other one I didn't get the paper, copy of the other paper. So the main argument in the paper is that certain local programs, notwithstanding their discriminatory nature, can promote global welfare by providing global public goods such as clean air. The example for such program in this paper, what is cited is, often cited, is the renewable energy companies, the subsidies that renewable energy companies get in different countries, particularly in the United States. Now, an important aspect of such program is that these programs contain local content requirements, and therefore they discriminate against foreign producers. Now, that is clearly a violation of the WTO's non-discrimination rule and national treatment clause. So, however, this LCR, the local content requirements, has certain advantage in this particular context because they ensure that there is political support at the local level for these programs that otherwise might not pass otherwise. So, the paper argues that international rules under WTO have to be evolved to take into account the increased role of local governments in providing global public goods. So now, then it also argues that it is very clear upfront that a measure without a trade distorting discriminatory provision is always preferable to the same measure with a discriminatory provision. The author is very clear about that, but the author acknowledges that this is difficult to achieve under the current circumstances. So, local discrimination may in some cases be a second best alternative to an undersupply of the public good. Now, some of my observation in this context is that I clearly understand the political economy argument in the paper, but I have some issues with the argument regarding the welfare argument, especially with respect to the economic efficiency related arguments. So, first question is this really the second best? Are there other alternatives, better alternatives to address this issue of market failure, which are less distortionary than what is suggested in the paper? Now, why I ask this question is that because these local content requirements create a lot of economic inefficiency, and therefore it is very clear that it has to be very sure that the benefits that comes from these kind of measures, programs, clearly outweigh all the costs associated with the local content requirements. Now, there could be alternative measures which may yield the same benefit but at a lower cost. But if such alternatives are available, one should really prefer those alternatives rather than going for the local content requirements. Now, why local content requirements are economically inefficient? What are the associated costs? The argument is very clear. It is basically an argument with respect to free trade and protection. So it's the same kind of argument can be put out here. Because when you have a large number of inefficient producers operating at suboptimal scale in each region, local jurisdictions, when you compare that with a few number of large and efficient producers which are operating at the global level, then clearly the efficiency level of the bigger ones would be much higher. So that is clearly one argument. Then another thing which is completely missing in the paper is that the entire general equilibrium impact for the local economy from this kind of a policy measure is completely ignored. Why the general equilibrium impact is important? Because when you have these local content requirements and you have this local discrimination, it has several impacts for the rest of the economy. One is that there is a allocative efficiency loss for the local economy. How does that happen? Because resources are reallocated from efficient to inefficient users within the local economy as a result of this, which has resource cost, efficiency cost for the local economy. So this also has implication for government revenue because when providing subsidy, there is a possibility of diverting government revenue for more desirable and more important welfare programs to some producers who get this subsidy. So that issue is there. Then, so what it means is that a legislation which is generally perceived by politicians as a welfare improving legislation could actually be welfare reducing in practice. So one has to be really careful about these things. Now, another important issue in this context of local content requirement is in the present context of international commerce, where production process globally is organized under global production networks, where production processes are geographically fragmented, then it is extremely difficult to achieve these local content requirements in a very realistic sense, and it can be highly inefficient. Now, what does it mean? It's basically like, for example, most of the free trade agreements and preferential trade agreements that countries sign, they all have these local content regulations, restrictions, many of these free trade agreements. But many of these free trade agreements, the utilization level of this free trade agreement, what I mean by utilization level is that the extent to which the importers actually utilize these concessions given as part of the free trade agreement is very low. The reason is that it is extremely difficult to satisfy these local content restrictions in a context where global production networks are widespread. Now, what do you mean by global production network? This is an example which is very often cited, is the production of Boeing aircraft. Now, there are so many countries involved in the production of a single product. A very simple product like a Barbie doll, there are 16 countries involved in the production of a single product like a Barbie doll. Now, this is another example like iPad. There are several countries, we say that iPad is made in China, but only 3% of value addition happened in China. The rest of the value addition happens in other countries. Now, this is true in most of the products, including energy-related products, solar panel, and so many other products. Now, under these conditions, when you insist on local content requirements, it can, at the local level, then it can can happen only at the cost of a very high level of economic inefficiency. Because when you do this, then the cost of production at the local level, when you are asking that you have to procure the parts and components locally, then the cost of production would really go up. Now, the measures that are politically feasible may not be economically efficient. Now, another argument which is made in the paper is that the non-discrimination rules narrows the space for lawmaking and restrict the ability of smaller jurisdictions to enact laws. Now, so that is one argument why you need to have discrimination-based rules, yes, which will enlarge the possibilities for enacting laws. Now, the question is restricting the space for lawmaking necessarily bad, especially for the regional or local government? Because discriminatory protectionist measures, as argued out in the paper, such as local content requirements, are ideal instruments for cheap coalition building. And this can lead to politically, therefore it would be politically feasible to enact large number of legislation, but many of them could be economically inefficient. So, in fact, what it means is that narrowing the space for legislation may actually force politicians at the local level to prioritize and enact only the most efficient legislations. I'll just come. So, my final observation is that the paper argues that there is a clear need for the WTO tribunal to distinguish between increasing local content restrictions, welfare increasing local content restrictions from welfare decreasing local content restrictions. I understand the argument in the paper, but when it comes to the actual implementation of that, I think it could be extremely very difficult to understand a priori which are the measures which can be welfare increasing as compared to the welfare decreasing LCRs. And see, in a country context like India, for example, if you want to promote this kind of climate, clean energy related investments, I think there could be better alternatives that we can think about. Rather than incentivizing the private sector by giving particular subsidies in the form of subsidies, another to address market failure kind of problems. Another possible alternative is to have the public sector enterprises invest heavily in these kind of sectors. So the public sector, now the issue of getting political support can be resolved because when a public sector enterprise is set up, a new investment happens in a state government, there will be political support from that particular jurisdictions because you can always argue that this can lead to local employment generation. And you can have conditions that some of the employment which would be generated in the newly established public sector enterprise should come from the local economy. So there are other alternatives that one can think about as compared to the local content restrictions, which can be highly distortionary in terms of an economic sense. Thank you.
Thanks a lot.